Why do people act like it's unacceptable to care about a partner's sexual history as a preference? I think because, at least some of the time, the preference is used to couch negative judgment and perpetuation of harmful myths about sex. More sexually active people. It's fine to have a preference. Everyone does. But it becomes an issue when it turns to treating others poorly because of your preference. If that makes sense. I can understand if someone says, people I'm compatible with are likely to have a similar sexual history to me. That's probably true as a broad generality. People with a similar attitude about sex to you will probably have had similar sexual histories. Got it. The part that confuses me is actually evaluating someone based on the arbitrary number you've picked rather than the person they are now and whether you find yourself compatible with them. That seems like an ass-backwards way of thinking about it. What matters is the values they have now and whether you make a connection with them as they are now. Once you have that, how is the number important at all? We became so afraid of slut-shaming we swung too hard in the other direction. It's hard for people to accept multiple things can be acceptable at the same time. I personally view sex as a very significant thing emotionally, spiritually. And some don't say it doesn't matter to them. It's okay to feel it's important and equally okay not to care at all. I'd say it's not acceptable to have a high body count and look for someone with a low body count. Bit hypocritical, but otherwise your preference is your preference. The people who think it's unacceptable to have a preference likely don't have much of a preference themselves, or have had an active sexual history and feel attacked by your preference. You don't need to listen to these people's opinions if you don't want. There is nothing wrong with having a preference. It's fine to want someone with the same values as you, if you're not judging others. But it's also a bit silly to think that someone's body count tells anything like the full story. You could just as easily find a virgin who is a virgin because they have never had the opportunity to have sex with someone they like. Yet they have exactly the same values as someone who's slept with 10 people because people they like have more regularly approached them, said yes to them. It's totally valid to want to be with someone who views sex the same way as you do. But you are assuming someone with a high number doesn't see sex as very significant. Emotionally, spiritually, people's wants, needs and views change over time. Someone with a high number may have been just doing the same as all their friends until they realized they didn't like how it made them feel, or until they matured, or until they met someone who they connected with emotionally and spiritually and realized that was a different experience. And maybe they don't want sex without that connection. There are lots of reasons someone may have a high number. And someone can change their views on sex and still have no problem with their past. It doesn't make it shameful just because they now better understand what they want. So, ultimately, your reasoning for why it's valid make no sense. You could have a profound sexual, emotional, spiritual connection with someone who wants monogamy, love, and commitment, and you'd dismiss them due to their past? If the answer is yes, then it seems your preference is less about compatibility and more about seeing sexual experience as something shameful. People's history matters if they've done something categorically wrong, like cheating, stealing, or harming another. And one would take a risk in hoping the person has changed. But having sex with many people is not categorically wrong. Caring about a partner's sexual history, without any context, often points to insecurity or a view that sex is shameful. It's one thing to have a preference. It's another fully different thing be the creepy person who is like, I only date virgins, or, you have more than X sexual partners. You must be a slut. Quote, Usually people who prefer people with a few sexual partners or try to perpetuate some kind of stereotype. Heck, you yourself are doing that in your post. I personally view sex as a very significant thing emotionally, spiritually. Obviously someone who has slept with dozens of people and has no problem with it doesn't. So there isn't anything wrong with me just not wanting to date them on that basis. Notice how you say that, obviously, someone who has had many sexual partners don't view sex as something significantly emotionally or spiritually. Isn't that just a preconception you're making about a whole ass group of people with no proof whatsoever? I've had like 10 sexual partners. Not dozens, as you mentioned, but close. And I'm fully demisexual. What do you think of that? Would you not date me just because of that number despite knowing I am demisexual and the only reason I would get intimate with someone is if there is a strong emotional connection? I'm 44. I had a wild few years a long time ago. Then I married for a long time and now I'm divorced. No one even asks about any of that nowadays. I certainly don't ask either. It's so weird how people are hung up on it. I'd be more bothered about how well you get on now and what stage you're both at now. People change through their lives. Sex isn't that big a deal. I feel like this is mostly a topic for young people. As you get older, people seem to care less. In most cases, people don't want their history asked about or to be judged by it. Often because it tells a story of how they view sex, treat others, or themselves. When it comes down to preference based on sexual history, it can feel like someone might be looking for things they can judge you on in a negative way. For example, some people might not prefer someone with more experience than them because they feel compared to a large pool of partners, and may prefer a less experienced partner, as perhaps they'd like to instruct someone or learn about sex together, or find someone who is very similar in partner seeking. There's also the opposite side of wanting a very experienced partner, because you may have had disappointing encounters or learned exactly what you like, which, in that case, you're also looking for someone very similar. At the end of the day, preference comes down to individual interests and finding the right person where that aligns in the right way for you both. Let your preference be your preference. You are allowed to be judgmental and hypocrite. Humans in general are both. People in comments are in fact judging your judgment. Oh, is this inspired by the comments in my post? I am also genuinely curious about this op. I agree with you. Sex for me is a significant thing emotionally. I haven't been able to bring myself to have one-night stands or meaningless casual sex. Even though there was a period where I really wanted to, it's just not how I'm wired. But whenever I make that known, so many internet people automatically assume that means I'm shaming people who don't think like me. All I can say is that in the few instances when I've had the courage to express this to close people in person, I am not ridiculed and attacked to the extent that I am online. So I would extrapolate that it's just perhaps an effect highlighted by the demographic of the internet community. Or I'm just weird. I think also it's naive to expect your perspective on sex to be the same as everyone. You're assuming that because someone has a higher number of sexual partners that they do not view sex to be emotional, spiritual. I think that line of thinking is unfair. It's better to discuss that with a partner rather than assume it is so. Maybe that person is especially good at creating meaningful connections with many people. It all depends. I rather have someone who is experienced than 5 seconds of disappointment. Added. I don't think the preference is the problem. It's how people go about it. If you don't want someone to have a high body count, don't be a dick about it. Don't shame someone for it. That's the problem, is shaming. You'd be better off framing it as having differing perceived values and attitudes towards sex than That someone has had too many partners. One is loaded and one isn't. There's a lot of religious weight put on being virginal, which is historically, and presently, directed primarily at women. And it could be that people are seeing you valuing virginity, specifically, which inherently gives the ick because it is fetishized. Beyond that, women are slut-shamed for having multiple partners whereas men are congratulated. Without your elaboration, I'd say you are likely to be lumped in with the slut-shaming group while being sexually active yourself. Another ick factor. I don't agree that people want sex to mean nothing to everyone. People want to remove the stigma of having sex, especially for women, in a sexually repressed country. As well, sex can be significant to you and you can still have a lot of partners. Those are not mutually exclusive. You're allowed to request a prude. It just seems very judgmental to ask for a number. Sexual history is personal business. Beyond an STD, it isn't anybody else's business. Sex is viewed by many as a sacred, intimate act. Sex is also viewed by many as NBD, something which is a human experience. There is truth to both viewpoints, but the fact that there are two means that people will always have different opinions on the matter. I hate these kinds of questions because the answer is always going to be, people are different. Like seriously, are you just trying to get a rise out of the comment section? Probably because most people who judge that way have a high body count themselves. Personally, I find it hard to see it as anything but judgmental. Firstly, because ideas of women being pure or used are degrading and harmful, but also because it feels super religious and based on some old-fashioned idea that sex in itself is wrong. If you take this opinion slightly to the further, you quickly find yourself in shared territory as religion fundamentalists who stone adulterers. To add to that, maybe not in your case but a lot of men prefer sexually inexperienced people because they feel more confident, in control when they are leading things. This comes from fragility and can be exploitative at times if the difference in experience is abused. A lot of sexual promiscuity at a young age could be a potential red flag for the well-being of someone, but we should remain open-minded to the idea that a potentially ideal partner of yours could be someone who is more sexually experienced. It's experience after all, so if you're learning from it, then it's positive.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.